About 6 months ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal exploring the question of why do we see an uptick in murder rates among blacks in America while the murder rates for everyone else is going down. And the analysis of the article was essentially, we are now importing to our communities prison culture. And in 1980, there were 800,000 Americans in prison. Today, 2.3 million. But one of the things, let's lock the bad guys up and make our communities safe, what they forget is today 700,000 people graduate from prison and jail and go back to our communities. And a significant portion of those have been trained by the greatest criminals in America to take the shit back to where they live. You know, and that's an unintended consequence of locking people up. Now we have 700,000 freshly graduated prisoners going back to the communities, some of whom are bringing prison with them. Our next speaker is Craig Reinarman. He's a professor of sociology and legal studies at University of California, Santa Cruz. He's been a visiting scholar at the Center for Drug Research at the University of Amsterdam, a member of the board of directors of the College on Problems of Drug Dependence, a consultant for the World Health Organization, its program on substance abuse, and a principal investigator on research grants from the National Institute of Drug Abuse and the National Institute of Justice. Great.
Must have been about 10 years ago or so that I was speaking at a NORML conference, I think in Washington, D.C. Alan St. Pierre introduced me in a pathologically generous way as a well-known quantitative sociologist. And all of my closest colleagues and friends in the audience burst into laughter. Because this wasn't true at all. And ever since, I felt obliged to bring slides, which are, I'll show up in a minute. I worked on a study a while back with Peter Cohen, who was the head of the Center for Drug Research at the University of Amsterdam, comparing seasoned cannabis users in that city with their counterparts in San Francisco. And we published the results in American Journal of Public Health. And so the results came out. Peter Cohen was bitterly disappointed that the world didn't change. Yeah. And he was just outraged that we had shown that things were much worse off in San Francisco than they were in Amsterdam, where you couldn't really throw a brick without hitting a coffee shop that sold marijuana legally. And he thought that this would make a difference somehow. And I assured him that that was very unlikely. Trying to combat drug war propaganda with empirical evidence and logic was pretty much a fool's errand. We had to continue to try, but big rock, steep hill. No amount of data or rational reasoning seems capable of moving the policy debate very far. Fear of drugs, I think, in the United States is something quite like religious belief. You can't really move people off it very easily. But if nothing else, I said to Peter Cohen, science, social science can be used to make evidentiary stones that drug law reformers like us can throw at the glass house of punitive prohibition. He liked that phrase. So we've been doing that sort of thing ever since. I'm not sure that the house of prohibition is about to fall, but it's an awful lot of noise and broken glass around. 20 million arrests. They are based on a policy that has some very shaky assumptions. And I want to tell you a little bit about some of the things we found out in this study. This is, was published in the, is just out in the International Journal of Drug Policy. Now, let's see if I can move these slides. Yeah. One of the things that the Dutch drug policy was designed to do was to separate the market for cannabis, so-called soft drugs, from so-called harder drugs. And so we asked our sample of experienced users whether they could get other drugs at the source. Now, if you notice, the yes column, the light blue, in Amsterdam about 15% said yes they could, but in San Francisco over 50% said they could. So 3 times as many people could get other drugs at their source. This is a pretty decent indicator that there's been substantial success in the Dutch system separating those markets. Okay. Next one. Price. One of the bases of marijuana policy in the United States is let's, with all these 20 million arrests, make life sufficiently difficult for people that it will reduce the number of people willing to supply marijuana, and that will increase the price, which will reduce consumption, and so on and so on. Well, it turns out, we asked our experienced users, if cannabis became much more expensive, would you use less? And again, if you look at this light blue bar, the percentage saying yes, you don't really see much difference between the 2 cities. Very different policy regimes, legal regimes, but not much difference in that. So price doesn't appear by this criteria anyway to have much of an impact. And we asked it the other way too, if cannabis became much cheaper, would you use more? Now slightly, significantly more in San Francisco said yes, but the great majority in both cities, 87% in San Francisco and close to 95% in Amsterdam said no. Price, in other words, if your policy regime is based on the notion you're going to manipulate price and steer people away from supply or demand, it doesn't seem like that's going to work very well. Now, we asked about potency. One of the preeminent rationalizations now offered by the drug czar and other drug warriors is that this is not your father's marijuana, or your mother's. This is really strong stuff. We had some fairly absurd claims along these lines. For example, Lee Brown, former drug czar, he said recently that cannabis is 40 times more potent today than 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Where can we buy it?
The irony that this increased potency has much to do with the law enforcement pressure, it seems to be forever lost on them. But then you had other people like McDonald said that the potency has increased 100 times. Lee Brown looked very conservative. But of course, when you ask people what kind of cannabis they prefer, we saw some very interesting differences between Amsterdam and San Francisco. The seasoned users in Amsterdam were much more likely to prefer mild and moderate strength, and the San Francisco users much more likely to pick the strong or very strong varieties. Now, we don't think this is because people in San Francisco are more drug crazed. We think this is because they can never be sure of supply. And so, given the choice, and you don't know how good your next buy is going to be or what potency and so forth, opt for the stronger stuff. That way you can be assured. In Amsterdam, they don't have to worry about that, and so they gravitated toward the mild and moderate forms. Of course, we also asked them, when you are using stronger cannabis, do you use less, the same, or more? And as you see, in both cities, the overwhelming majority, close to 3/4, all report that they use less. About 1/4 said the same. The people I really want to interview, frankly, are the little tiny orange bars down there on the bottom, who, when they get stronger stuff, want to use more. But they are a very tiny fraction of the user population in both cities. Okay. We also wanted to ask about fear of arrest. And it turns out that, again, in both cities, while about 1 in 10 of the people we interviewed, or 1 in 12 rather, the people we interviewed in San Francisco had actually been arrested for a cannabis offense, they agreed pretty much with the Amsterdam respondents that their likelihood of actually being arrested was really very low. Unlikely. And that, of course, puts a crimp in the whole deterrence theory that we have these 20 million arrests because we're going to scare people away from it. But people don't really believe that they're going to get arrested, actually.